this is honestly a fight for tribal reaffirmation, because the fact is the Tuscarora still have a relationship with the state via these treaties, via the state laws. None of it has erased the Tuscarora's treaties or the responsibilities and relationships that the state assembly agreed to back in the early 1700s with our Tuscarora chiefs during and after the wars, excuse me.
An American Indian group with a long and complicated history in North Carolina is renewing its push for state recognition and the benefits that come with the status. From Maxton to Murfreesboro, you're listening to the WUNC Politics Podcast. I'm Colin Campbell, WUNC's Capitol Bureau Chief. Leaders of the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina recently visited the state legislature to lobby for a House bill that would grant them state recognition as an American Indian tribe. The bill is sponsored by Republican Representative Ed Goodwin of Edenton. He's filed similar legislation in past years with little success, but he says he views the issue as a matter of fairness.
Every time something comes up and is shut down, I can't believe at this time in our history, we're taking a people group, Native American people group, here before all the rest of us were here, and we're treating them the way we're treating them. It's not right. It's an organized effort in this state, not just the other tribes in the state, but I'm talking about state government.
But opposition from other American Indian groups, particularly the Tuscarora's Lumbee neighbors down in Robeson County, have scuttled the proposal in recent years. House Speaker Tim Moore told reporters he doesn't think the bill will get enough support to get to the House floor.
There is a lot of opposition, as I understand from that, and we have not caucused it. I've had some good conversations with Representative Goodwin. I've also spoken with Representative Lowry, of course, who's Lumbee and has a lot of really serious concerns with the bill. So I don't know that bill is going to move forward this year.
To learn more about the Tuscarora Nation and their long fight for recognition, I'm joined by their public relations officer, Rahna Donnie McDowell. Thanks so much for speaking with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So to start out, tell me a little bit more about the Tuscarora people in North Carolina. What's the tribe's history here in the state?
The Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina were composed of the descendants of Tuscaroras that migrated from Indian Woods Tuscarora Reservation in Bertie County on the Roanoke River in what is the eastern section of North Carolina to what are the swamps of Robeson County, effectively the border between the states of North Carolina and South Carolina. After the wars, the Tuscarora Wars, and what is the American Revolution, our ancestors, instead of migrating to New York or, staying on the lands there because there was continued encroachment and certain laws did not protect effectively our jurisdiction and resources and people there as far as our nationhood, our resources, our right to hunt on the land, to fish on the land, to occupy our lands, and then just right to recourse and reconciliation and legal means against those encroachments. And so with little recourse, there was just this open land that no one was really inhabiting. So we settled in those what were those boundary areas of those swamps. We'd always lived on the swamps in what is North Carolina, the Roanoke River, the Tar River, the Neuse, and even as far as the Cape Fear, our ancestors hunted and had what were seasonal encampments along those rivers. And so we have historically occupied what is called North Carolina for thousands of years, and that is confirmed by archaeological evidence, Cashew Face pottery, Mount Pleasant Face pottery. They have been historically identified and culturally associated with Tuscarora occupation across the state, and those go back to at least what is 500 BC with the Mount Pleasant Face pottery. So with that pottery, we know how long the Tuscarora ancestors have at least been in North Carolina. The language says that we split from the main body of the Iroquois, Proto-Iroquoian main group somewhere between 2,000 to 3,000 years ago. So when you start putting some of these pieces together, archaeological data, what is linguistical data on earlier contact period Tuscarora people, we see that we've been inhabiting North Carolina far longer than what most people are even relatively thinking or considering the Tuscarora or have been around. So the Tuscarora, our ancestors have inhabited this land amongst most of its rivers for thousands of years.
Jumping ahead toward the present day, what are some of the sort of annual traditions, whether it's a powwow or something else, that the Tuscarora are involved in here in North Carolina in modern day? Sort of set the scene for me, for someone who's not been to one of the events that the Tuscarora Nation hosts on a regular basis, what that looks like.
So usually we have our annual powwow in May. I think it's the second weekend of May every year, as long as, we don't get rained out, there's any kind of terrible storm. And of course, since COVID, any type of public disturbance, health disparity, epidemic, pandemic of any sort. So we have our powwow every year, and, usually, when we have the right kind of resources and networking going on and those people are available, we have, groups from Aztec communities coming up and dancing and showcasing their culture here in Maxton. We have our northern relatives from Mohawk and Seneca and Onondaga nations, if not multiple, of all those Confederacy nations coming from Haudenosaunee countries, both Canada and New York. And so it can be quite big some years. They help ground us. They help us, become one-minded as a community, not in the way that we just all agree, but that we will all be willing to work together to find a resolution amongst ourselves to benefit our families, our communities, and the 7 generations to come in that perspective. So, these things are very important to Tuscarora Nation, and despite economic reasons, despite political reasons, whatever that may be, the Tuscarora continues to participate and perform and endure practicing our traditional ceremonies and cultural items in order to keep our people in a stronger mindset, to have stronger confidence in themselves as Tuscarora people, and to help them remain self-determined as Tuscarora tribal members.
Talk a little about how you guys have tried to keep the language alive. I know in introducing you, you have part of your name is a traditional name in the Tuscarora language. Part of your name is it sounds like an English-sounding name. How does that work, and what do you guys do in terms of the language side of things?
So, like at home, we're taught, by our instructor, Rahna, Dwayne Brayboy. We're taught by our instructor in the traditional way, to give back the language to our children, to our parents, to our elders, for those who don't know it, for those who have learned it, even in the smallest ways, to just start using those words, whether it's hey, whether it's I'll see you again, whether it's you are precious to me. All these things in our language are very important because they told things about our worldview. And that's essential in reclaiming our identity. It's essential in reclaiming our cultural heritage in that way of decolonizing the mind and decolonizing the practice. There's just certain things you're not going to get in English, and there's certain things we can't say in Tuscarora that's going to make the same sense when you translate it out. It's just not the way it works. And it shows clearly the differentiation in worldview construct, in social culture, in spiritual systems of living. And so, my daughter right now, who's 4 years old, she's being taught by my wife, who's non-Tuscarora, who's half Taino, Puerto Rican, is, instituting learning her number sets and starting to learn her color sets in Tuscarora so that she has an understanding of her culture early on, and that she can appreciate claiming that and stating it in the language first before jumping to English. The language is so at risk between all of our communities, whether that be Canada's 6 Nations Grand River, whether that be Lewiston, New York, and Tuscarora there, whether that's here in Maxton, Prospect, or Saddle Tree in our communities. It's our elders perish. There's drugs and abuses killing our people every day, whether it's youth or mothers, fathers, children. We're losing our membership each and every day. So that's another battle we're losing on reclaiming the language if we can't transmit it to one another.
Switching gears now to the push for state recognition, how long has this fight for recognition been going on? I understand from Representative Goodwin, he's filed this bill before, but when did you guys, the Tuscarora Nation, start this process, and what's been sort of the big impediments here?
But see, and that's another complicated issue. So, if we and I won't drag this answer out, I'll try to be very short about it and round it back to the core answer here. But, in that long message, the Tuscarora have always been fighting for what could either be classified in both scenarios as state and federal recognition, because in some instances, these two things never existed to a certain period of time, to where they came essential to what were Indian people across the entire United States and Canada, who were then the minority of all minorities in their own homelands, meaning the United States population for Indian people in, say, 1900 was 250,000 people. that claimed or could be identified as Indian American, Indian, Native American, in a place where millions of foreigners and colonized communities now existed. And so in that way of fighting for one's representation, say the treaties from the Tuscarora Wars, say the reservation that we had, and all of the laws that have been put in effect through the state's legislature since the early 1700s to disenfranchise Tuscarora descendants from those claims of protecting that land and proper, whether that be the treaty relationships or the fact that the state had already recognized the Tuscarora multiple times via this legislation. And so it becomes a very complicated scenario, because this is honestly a fight for tribal reaffirmation, because the fact is the Tuscarora still have a relationship with the state via these treaties, via the state laws. None of it has erased the Tuscarora's treaties or the responsibilities and relationships that the state assembly agreed to back in the early 1700s with our Tuscarora chiefs during and after the wars, excuse me. And so we sort of know what the case is, that the Tuscarora have always fought for this freedom, this right to remain unencumbered by another system that prejudices Indian people, Tuscaroras especially, because of a need of land and resources that did not belong to the colonists, that did not belong to the settlers, and belonged to the ancestors of the Tuscarora Nation. So the 1970s, there was a very strong presence of Tuscarora activism because of the networking, because of these other movements like the Civil Rights Movement in the latter 60s, Alcatraz movement there in San Francisco Bay, Wounded Knee that was occurring there, all these different movements by Native Americans rising up in order to hold not only the settler society governments, whether that's their state, their county, their federal government that's saying that they represent them in their affairs and their people and their land, or that's their own tribal councils and tribal governments, and holding them accountable for the corruption that was going on and is still going on. So, it's been very confused that this Tuscarora fight for state recognition began sometime in the 70s. But just to correct that, this is a fight for tribal reaffirmation. The Tuscarora have always had a relationship with the state, with the General Assembly. Our ancestors started that relationship during and after the Tuscarora Wars. The state accepted that relationship by answering the call to peace on those treaties. Those treaties exist and are present in Raleigh. The Department of Cultural and Natural Resources holds those treaties. So that is state acknowledgement. That is a relationship with the state that has always been there, that the state has never denied and does not deny today. They just do not honor it.
Is most of the opposition from this, as I'm reading into it, come from the your neighbors in Robeson County, the Lumbee? I see a claim out there that the Tuscarora are somehow a splinter group from the Lumbee. Is that sort of the sticking point here, or are there other issues afoot from where you sit?
There's been some claim here, depending on where you look and depending on who you're speaking to. But officially, if we're tracking what Lumbee tribe claims, they have particularly in their constitution that they are a core group of Chiral Indians. And so with that being said, that means they're Chiral. Okay, that should be pretty plain and simple. They claim it in their constitution. They voted to be Chiral. That's what they are. Okay, so the Tuscarora Nation, we have the evidence to show that we're direct descendants of Tuscarora ancestors that migrated from this area to this area, still continue to survive and maintain our peoplehood, culture, political sovereignty, and all these different things despite colonial encroachment. So the distinguishing factor is that Tuscarora has a culture separate from Lumbee tribe. Tuscaroras have political leadership, ancestral kinship that is separate from what Lumbee tribe claims. So in that way, the disposition comes in that oftentimes tribes in close regions often have a shared ancestor or intermarried early on, and it's very confusing to have to try and delineate that far ago, well, who was Tuscarora and who wasn't. And we know today who was Tuscarora and who was not by following genealogy, by following the historical evidence, by following archaeology, by following official records from the state and counties and federal governments and census records and all this other data that the state and federal government and other tribes are using to do their own due diligence for self-determination and active self-representation. So, as we spoke recently after the press conference to a few other media places, the big thing is, what's this opposition? We like to clarify that traditional rivalries have always been present here on this land before colonial invasion. So it is no big mystery to us that we have opposition. The Cherokee opposed the Lumbee. That's not the first case of any other Native American tribe opposing another, because those historical rivalries have existed and continue to persist, and they influence these types of political decisions where fairness should be the priority and not political bias.
What benefits actually come with state recognition? Why is it so important for the Tuscarora to have this status with state government? And is there sort of a resource scarcity issue with this? Is some of the opposition that there's funding that comes with that perhaps other tribes feel like they might get less of if the Tuscarora get this particular status?
Every single one of those tribal communities that's recognized on the Indian Commission, even the urban Indian organizations, they all are invited to and are sent and can apply for millions of dollars of grant funding specifically for American Indian communities. They're earmarked this funding through COVID monies, through HUD monies. One of the biggest issues for Tuscarora Nation members is the active coercion to strip away resources from the Tuscarora tribal membership in a way such that we would have to be fooled to go enroll at another tribe that's already state recognized or approved of to get the same access to benefits. And I'll tell you that benefit clearly because it's one our community's members continue to have a problem with. And that is the Department of Health and Human Services, their LEHAP program, which is the Low Income Heating and Energy Assistance Program. So I don't know if you're aware. I don't know if most constituents in North Carolina are aware of this fact. But if you're any Native American in a 4-county region, which makes up Robeson, Scotland, Cumberland, and I believe Hoke County, if it hasn't changed, has to go through Lumbee Tribe to access and apply for the LEHAP program, which means that every single Tuscarora tribal citizen in those 4-county regions, if they reside within it, despite being enrolled at Tuscarora Nation, would have to forfeit their enrollment, enroll at Lumbee Tribe, just to apply for the benefit. And that doesn't mean they're going to get access to it. So, in much of a nutshell, certain resources are being promoted, are being blockaded, and are being privileged away from specifically and only Tuscarora tribal citizens. So in that instance, it becomes a major problem because it makes Tuscarora members have to make these really hard decisions on what they're going to do. Do they need this resource that much? Is it going to pay their light bill and get them through the winter season? And then, the aspect is when you go to ask for investigating this fact, we're told there's nothing that we can do about it.
And as we wrap up, that's a huge amount of opposition that you guys have to overcome. What's the strategy going forward to try to get this kind of legislation passed and try to get that recognition at the state level?
We're being told continuously, that people just do not know who the Tuscarora are. And while I find that to be quite funny, I'll take it as it is. And if that's the case, then that seems that the Tuscarora have to stand on their own, and we have to network. We have to show people that we're still here, like we did in the press conference. We have to represent ourselves in the best of our ability, speak our language, do our dances, practice our ceremonies, participate and perform our ceremonies in social life ways. Continue to unite our community members, continue to, do our traditional ways of survival and giving to each other, being charitable to each other, having generosity, and being patient with one another. And so in revitalizing these relationships with Representative Goodwin and members of the legislature, letting them hear our language in the city of the city of Raleigh, in what is the state capital, what was and still is ancestral Tuscarora land. It meant the world to us to be given at least a moment to have the floor, speak our piece, and be seen and heard. And that was momentous, historic at this moment. So, we'll count that as a major win, that people are seeing and hearing Tuscarora again. And so, we don't ever want to be a shadow in somebody's mind that we're extinct, that we completely removed from the land, because those two things are furthest from the truth. If this is a matter of education, of decolonizing history, of unleashing and unwinding, what would be this indoctrinated mindset of what people think is true and what's popular, what is commercialized, for instance, then it's a no-brainer. We have the data to back it up. We have, we can show the evidence where it sits in Raleigh. We can show in the state legislature where these laws still exist and have never been repealed, that says our people were Tuscarora Indians, that said we had lands that were treated as a reservation, that said we had treaties with state government, things which qualify us to certain satisfaction on criteria for federal acknowledgement at this point.
Rahna Wagiv, Donnie McDowell is the Public Relations Officer for the Tuscarora Nation of North Carolina. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Nyawan. And if get. We'll see you again.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you have any feedback or ideas for the podcast, feel free to reach out. I'm on the website formerly known as Twitter at Raleigh Reporter, or you can find me through our website, WUNC.org. I'm Colin Campbell. Thanks for listening.